Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I am reviewing the early 90s action sci-fi classic, Demolition Man. This is a Patreon request from my buddy John. And John, just so you know, I am a little sorry this is going up later than I intended. A little busy. It's a lot of stuff going on at work, all I'm going to go into. And by the way, that other one that you belated got to me, I am going to get to that one next, just so you know. Just throwing that out here. Now, before I get too far into the video, just a reminder, if you do want to support the channel and gain access to videos early and be able to suggest topics for videos like this, you can always join the Patreon. And if you just want to do a one-off request or one-off support, go the PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated, and the links for those are going to be down below. Demolition Man. This, I think, is actually the first time I've watched the entire film straight through like this. Because technically I've watched the whole film before this, but it's like in spurts. Like I'd seen the beginning of it, then had to go do something, see the ending part of it. And it's a film I did enjoy, and watching it all together, I enjoy it even more. I don't know if there's like a better version of the DVD or something out there, because the only feature on the copy I have, which is that double feature DVD release with Over the Top, another Stallone film I gotta give a watch one of these days, is a commentary, which I think will be interesting to watch. And the movie is directed by Marco Rumbia, I believe is how the name is pronounced, since it's a Spanish first name and the double L, so I'm just guessing that. It could be Brambilla, but I'm going to go with Brambilla. Which, looking at his filmography, this is the only film of note, at least note to me, that he did. Everything else on there, like, nothing big, some music videos and all that, which kind of sad considering this is his first film, so right out the shoot, he gets his big one. And for a first one, he does a pretty good job. I mean, he also has cinematographer Alex Thompson there to help him, which Thompson has a very prolific career. These are the ones that stood out to me. He was a cinematographer for Cliffhanger, so another Stallone film, back to back there. Labyrinth, 80s classic from the Jim Henson. Excalibur, another fun little 80s film. Alien 3, regardless of how you like that film or not, you gotta admit at least the cinematography in that film is good. And of course, he also had Fincher to work with there. Childhood favorite of mine that I haven't watched in, I think, at least 25-ish years. You know, it's right over there. I can actually see the VHS case right there. Black Beauty 94. And of course, another favorite of mine that there is a review for already up on the channel from almost a decade ago. Hamlet 96, the Kenneth Branagh version. And the cinematography in that is very excellent, so he's in good hands there. The score is by Elliot Goldenthal. Excellent score there, too. Pretty good 90s action sci-fi one. Now, the film has 3 credited writers. We got Robert Renaud, I believe is how it's pronounced. Looks French, so I'm guessing Renaud. Then we got Peter M. Lenkov, who his only other films of note were Universal Soldier 2 and 3, which were the made-for-TV sequels to Universal Soldier that were eventually retconned with Universal Soldier The Return, and then the 2 direct-to-video ones, which I kind of heard mixed things about. I think it's mainly the last one that people don't really like as much, and that's because of a certain little plot twist involving Van Damme's character. But I haven't really watched any of the sequels, so no personal comments there. And then, of course, we got Daniel Waters, who is also known for a couple other films, but these are the 3 that stuck out. Heathers, Hudson Hawk, and Batman Returns. So he's got a pretty interesting filmography there. Now, Marco and the others, they had $57 million to work with here, so $57 million in early 90s money, pretty good, which is about 40-ish million less than T2 had, which that one has a little bit more grandiose set pieces. But for 57, early 90s, you definitely see a majority of that money up on the big screen. I mean, Stallone probably got a hefty chunk of change. I did a lot of the supporting cast. So I'd say probably at least around 30 of it went up onto the sets and special effects and all that. And just watching this film makes me really, really miss that early to mid 90s vibe that a lot of these films had, how they did the special effects. I mean, this is when they were starting to get into digital a little bit. Not so much, it was more the late 90s where we really got into it, but this is where they were just starting to come in. They were used in more subtle ways to accentuate the practical effects. I really do miss that. And then just the way that the films were shot, they were processed, and of course the score, I really do miss a lot of that vibe. But here's the thing. That budget number, I'm guessing, is just for the production and does not include the marketing for the film, which seems they never really do. It's usually a separate budget, I guess. But even if you were to later add that on in, this film would technically still be a flop by Hollywood standards financially for one reason. I've said it before and I'll say it again. By Hollywood logic, when it comes to numbers, you have to make double your budget to break even. Remember, the budget was $57 million. The worldwide gross, at least for the time, $58 million. So if you go look at the numbers, either way, it's not that impressive, sadly. I mean, if you go by Hollywood logic, way short, but even if you go by just normal budget where you make anything over what you spent, you got in the red, you spent all that money and all you got to show for it is a $1 million profit. That's not really a good thing. Unless you, like, even if you only spent $1 million on it and you got $2 million, I mean, that's still a better figure because you got less that you spend in it for a return. But for that, it's like, yeah, not good. Now, how much it's made has probably gone up. It's probably made over into the 100 million, if not more, figure with all the times it's been shown on TV, all the re-releases, and the following it's gotten since then. So it's definitely a money winner now, but that's how some films are. I mean, just because the VHS is handy. Another favorite of mine that was kind of interesting, since this is a request for John, me and him did a video on this one years ago. Waterworld. That one definitely didn't make that much money at the time, but in retrospect with all the re-releases, it's made a hefty chunk of change. That doesn't help as much because that's a bigger flop than this one, but you see my point. Now, the plot of the film is that Stallone plays a character named John Spartan. He is essentially a super cop. He's a sergeant, and he's going after a criminal named Simon Phoenix, played by Wesley Snipes, which I don't have Snipes' filmography open here. I don't know. I don't think this was one of his. I don't believe this was his first film. I think he did White Men Can't Jump before that. But this is a big, big film for Wesley Snipes. And I think that it's people liking his performance in this that eventually got him in the job as Blade. That's just me looking at the years and all that. I know he did some more films in between, but this, definitely seems like it helped get him his foot in the door. Now, Simon Phoenix, he's a big criminal. They got him. They do a raid on this place where he has hostages, and Spartan, after a fight, manages to catch him. But here's the kicker. Phoenix frames Spartan, because as they're looking in there, at first they find just the bodies of Phoenix's crew, but then they find the hostages, and Phoenix does a comment like, "Yeah, I told him they were in there, but he didn't care." Now, because of this, Spartan is railroaded and he is sentenced to prison. But at this point in time, instead of going to an actual prison, they send him to a cryo prison where he is frozen in cryogenic stasis for the majority of his sentence, and then he's woken up. Which, if you think about it, is not a bad deal. I mean, unless you do giving someone a life or a death sentence. If you're giving them like a certain amount of time, especially with the little fancy futuristic technology they put on you to help you rehabilitate you, it's not a bad idea. I mean, especially if it turns out later that the person is wrongly convicted, they would still be frozen literally in time at the age they were when the crime happened. They'd have all that stuff put in there to help rehabilitate them, make them a better person. Give them a hobby and all that. Maybe do some school and stuff that they want to do. But then, let's say they find out, like a decade into the sentence, that this person was wrongly convicted for something. Then he'd be like, okay, we're sorry, guys. But look, the upside is, you're still the same age you were before, so at least physically. So, you lost 10 years, and anybody you know is going to be older, but you yourself still can make up for that 10 years eventually. Which, I mean, in some regards might be just as bad as how it is in real life right now, but you kind of have that thing to balance out. Like, you don't have to worry about getting out and be like, I've been in prison for 80 years, I'm 98 years old. What am I going to do now? I was wrongly convicted. You don't have to worry about that. Instead, you get out and you still got your youth and be like, I was in for 90 years. Well, damn. Now, he is put under, and then we cut to the future. Now, the thing I mentioned about Phoenix saying that, later on, Phoenix tells Spartan to his face that he framed him. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it's one thing I gotta mention, because this is one part of the plot. Even when I was younger and watching as a kid, I was thinking subconsciously, like, But as an adult watching it, I'm like, yeah, this part of it, I'm not going to say it's really a plot hole, but it's really got you wondering about how incompetent the police force must be at this time, because the way they kind of show it is that the future that this world presents, the future of 1996, 3 years after the film was made, it's so lawless and all that it's like if you were to take the future we see in Predator 2 and really amp it up. But considering this film is also a satire in a way, it would make sense that you take that and amp it. But even with that, the thing, like, really? They weren't able to, like, look at the cameras from the helicopter, see that there were no other thermal ratings, or even this, even accounting for the explosion. Have a coroner look at the bodies to determine time of death. That is a thing. They'd be able to see that the bodies were already dead by the time they went into an explosion, be able to see the rigor mortis was already setting in. I mean, if they were fresh bodies, rigor mortis wouldn't have set in. I mean, even if Phoenix had just had them killed right before, there would probably still at least be some warmth so they could be able to determine that they killed them. And, you know, Spartan would be like, that son of a bitch, he killed the hostages already. Fuck him. Go all Rambo on him. But the fact that it's not brought up, you could consider it a flaw in the plot. I don't know if I'd go so far to say a hole, but if you go with the whole thing about how that future of 96 is presented, you can kind of see why it kind of falls through the cracks. And plus, maybe they also want to get rid of Spartan, so they didn't bother to look and then be like, you think we should tell them that we found this about the bodies? I didn't see anything. Well, Spartan is put under, and then we cut to a future about 40 years in the future. It's like 36 years, but I'm rounding up, just like they do a couple times in dialogue. In this future, just to put it nicely, this future sucks. I mean, we got some interesting technology, but overall, it sucks. And we could see it even before Spartan is brought back. And that's because you look at it and go, what the hell happened to people? And I forget which wrestler said it. I think it might have been Taz, or it might have been Scott Steiner. Actually, it might have been Samoa Joe. But I think it was Taz, actually, because of the accent thing. You've all gone soft. Yeah, the future went soft, but there's a reason for it in the plot, which I'll get to in a little bit. Everybody, it's like everybody, even when they're in adulthood, because of how the world is and how the laws are, and because of how certain things go, they never go past a certain maturity level, at least with how they interact in certain situations. And part of this is because everything that's bad for you is outlawed. Like they mentioned, no meat, which, considering we evolved as omnivores, I really would debate that. No caffeine, which, just as someone with ADHD in the future would be like, well, this is really going to suck for us. Because I'm guessing even the other stuff to help with ADHD would be outlawed, which means no Adderall, no stuff like that. So we'd really be bad. Unless, of course, they did something even darker, which I'm not going to address here, but I think you get the point. No physical contact sports, so no wrestling, no hockey, no football. Basketball will probably be pussified, just to use it. No gasoline. That's not a bad thing if you think about it, because then you got more electric cars, other types of fuel sources. So that's probably one of the few things that's not as bad And one of the things that actually is turning out to be true, we haven't banned it, but we are trying to get off the petroleum titty, as Robin Williams so eloquently put it back in '09. And of course, no physical contact of any kind. And that includes the bedroom tango. But it even goes to the fact you can't even high-five somebody. It's more like, which Rob Schneider and Benjamin Bratt do so well. But it's so bad in other ways because of the morality thing. And it's, you can't even curse. Every time you're cursed, you're fined 1 credit for violation of the moral morality statute. Now, this is one way that the film has aged pretty well. And that is, as Stallone put it in an interview one time, that it was ahead of its time. And that is because of things like cancel culture and other stuff like that, which that's a very big thing to discuss in here, so I'm not going to go too far into it, but just to give it a little bit of it, I think like anything, you find extremists in any type of group. Now, like, just look at like cinephiles, just as a film one. You'll find people that get very, very snobbish. Like I told the story of the one time I went and saw, I can't remember the name of the film. Not Reservoir Dogs. Pulp Fiction at Tarantino's theater. I got into a discussion with a guy. The guy turned out to be a elitist prick because we were talking about films that we've seen recently, and I had mentioned that, Suicide Squad, the first one, not the second one. I thought it was alright, and he's like, that's not a film, and I'm like thinking, like, really, you're one of those guys? And then he turned into a total jackass after that, so I'm like, oh, fine, fuck you then. Like that. Like, seriously? That type of thing. Elitist cinephiles are the ones that really annoy the crap out of me. They ruin being a cinema fan for just about everybody. You can find the same thing with music. Now, with groups like this, you'll find the same ones, because the ones that don't want you to be able to do anything. Like, I'm gonna probably this is an off the cuff one. You can obviously tell that. Now, based on some of the stuff I mentioned, like with meat, vegans, essentially. I'm going to a more extreme one with that. There are vegans that, themselves, they will not indulge in animal products. But they're not going to give a crap if they're hanging out with somebody. Let's say you go to a restaurant that has vegan options, but also non-vegan options. They could be sitting there, their friend could be eating the most bloody steak. They don't care. But then there's the ones that would be like, oh my God, I can't believe you're eating a steak. That animal had a name, it had a life. How dare you, you murderer. Those type of people. And those are the ones that ruin dining and, being a human that needs to eat for everybody. And the same thing, and those are the type of people that probably went into this type of world and be like, but like with cancel culture, those extreme vegans want to cancel eating meat or other animal products. And then there are people that want to cancel actors, people that want to cancel other stuff. I know I'm getting into it, like I said, but I got to touch on it a little bit just to say how this film has aged a little bit gracefully in that way. And this does show in very, very fun and wine-age satire the negative consequence of eventually going down a path where you basically just say no to everything. Now, not to say it's all bad. I'm giving a little bit of my personal opinion on this one. It's going to depend on the situation. I know I say that a lot. It's very situational, but stuff like that is. Like, since I brought it up, canceling actors, movies, and all that. Like, if you don't want to watch a certain actor, don't watch him. In certain cases, you can understand why. Like Kevin Spacey. I haven't really watched a lot of the movies that he's playing a lead character in, and it is a little weird sometimes to watch it considering the stuff he has done in recent years, but I can still watch the movies. Professional wrestling. What Chris Benoit did to his family was heinous, and I actually did a whole video about that Dark Side of the Ring episode with it if you want to watch and get my full thoughts on that. But I could actually still sit down and watch his matches. Now, Now, there is going to be a limit. Like when my buddy Mike, OCP Communications, when it comes to like films, the one place where I actually draw a line is a certain director who I'm not even going to have the courtesy of saying his name in here, but those of you who read Mike's stuff and watch his videos, you know who the hell I'm talking about. A certain disgraceful guy that did something very, very illegal and perverted to a child on the set of a film he made. And because of the fact he did that on the set of the film, now also to connect with that, if you know about the casting couch and the history of that, and you don't want to watch certain films because of stories going around with them, I can understand why. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other film examples I can tie in, like Judy Garland, and a whole bunch of other stuff from the golden age of Hollywood, amongst other stuff. But there's a thing. That should be a personal choice. It shouldn't be something where you go out there and pick it to the point where you make it to where nobody could watch it. That's the same thing as them, like when they briefly altered cartoons so nobody could watch the original one, and then finally they show the original one. I mean, if you want to give a warning about something that could be considered inappropriate because it hasn't aged well, like how the Japanese were portrayed in certain World War II era cartoons, that's one thing. But at least present the cartoon in its original format. Don't fully censor it. I mean, those of you, I don't think I've commented it, but I think it's stupid that Disney tries to hide the movie Song of the South from their history because of a couple things in it. They should follow Warner Brothers examples from the proper Canada cartoons. Now, all that said, like I said a little bit ago, this film, The World It Presents, is if you were to take all those extremes of basically trying to dictate what other people should be doing instead of it being a personal choice, and takes it to its logical conclusion. And I was going to save this one. I brought up one of the characters' names, and I think I probably should do this now, because then we get, as we're introduced to this world, we're introduced to our secondary protagonist, Lenina Huxley, who's played by Sandra Bullock. And her name is a combination of two. Huxley, the author of the novel from 1932, Brave New World, which was also about a future society where everything is predetermined for you so not to offend others, among other reasons. And you're not even supposed to show moderate emotion. So it's a little bit more extreme than this world in certain regards, but it's similar enough to where you can see why they named the character that. And they also gave her first name from a character from Brave New World. Now, she is one of those characters that while she lives in this world, she romanticizes elements from the past. More specifically, the 90s. I mean, she says the late 20th century, but most of the stuff we see in her office is from the 90s and how cops handled stuff back then. We see a lot of her colleagues. I mean, we see Benjamin Bratt Garcia. He definitely is one of the ones that's very immature. Well, I guess by our standards we consider him immature, but by his standards he'd be mature. And of course, Rob Schneider's character. And of course, Bratt is the one that has one. No, actually, no. It's Schneider that has a line. Where he's like, "We're police officers. We're not trained to handle this sort of violence." And of course, we got the chief character played by, I'm looking at my notes real quick, Bob Gunton, who you might remember from around the same time as a certain warden character that blows his brains out. He's just perfect playing these type of scumbag characters. Now, Phoenix is brought out of crowd freeze for a parole hearing, but the moment he's out there and he's being questioned by the warden, you can tell there's something not right, and he manages to escape, and we get the first murder that has happened in a long time. It's so bad that the police even have to look up, what the hell's a 187? And they look it up and they're like, ooh. Now here they call it a murder, death, kill, which continues with the parody that I've already addressed. Now they're trying to figure out what to do. Now, of course, they do send normal cops to go deal with him, but it's a little pathetic, and I think it's funny in a way, considering that these are cops, and how they're trying to deal with the situation is a step below how security deals with the situation, and being someone that works in security, I can say this with firsthand, that, trying to talk the situation out, get them to leave of their own volition, comply of their own volition. But the only difference is, whereas we working security, depending on where we work, whether we're subcontracted or we're actually working for the company. And depending on the policies in place, we can go hands-on if the situation provides it. Here, the cops don't even look like they know how to go hands-on other than with these like little taser night six things, which they can knock you out, but that's the only type of force they have. And being somebody that thinks that when police do use excessive force, it should be treated as such, I don't want to get on the whole tangent about it, because this is also where some of that little satire also comes into it. But I think this is in a bad way, because I don't think the cops should only have non-lethal force. They should have both options. And here, showing that they only have a non-lethal force, yeah. Now the world that they are operating in, I'm going to admit, looks like they don't need the lethal force options, but that's very, very idealistic. But that's where some of this satire comes into play. See, I'm not going to get full on that other tangent with it, but because that's a whole other video type of situation to talk about that stuff. Well, Phoenix is too much for the then modern cops of this film, so one of the older cops sets a suggestion. Phoenix is an old-fashioned type of criminal. We need an old-fashioned type of cop. And after looking at Spartan's history file and being like, they decided to unfreeze him, reinstate him, and put him on the case. And from there, it goes Spartan going back and forth, trying to apprehend Phoenix. Which their first little confrontation is one of my favorite bits in the movie, where it's the shootout in the museum. And I love the setup for it, where the chief is like, well, the only place you can even find a firearm is in a museum. Then the realization, he's like, oh, snap. And then it cuts to Phoenix walking through the museum. And their little shootout. Now, it's after this scene we find out that Phoenix is actually working for the guy who set up this entire world, this San Angeles, which is the remnants of 3 cities all put together. That, of course, is Nigel Hawthorne's character, Dr. Cocteau, who, as Hawthorne, was in a bunch of other films and did some other acting. He played Lord Covington / Lord Cuckoo Face in the Madeline live-action film, and he voiced Dr. Porter in Disney's Tarzan. Here he's perfect as Cocteau, because you really hate him. He's the type of character that wants to have the dark stuff done, but doesn't want to get his hands dirty. And how he did this hypnotic suggestion to Phoenix, to where Phoenix cannot lay a hand on him. He goes back to bite him in the butt later, because he's manipulated in turn. But Dr. Cocteau, he really is the puppet master that set this whole thing in place. All for his own ambitions, because he wants the world to be like him. And in that way, Cocteau is like the personification of the extremists within the cancel culture and other similar movements. That they want it their way. They want this. They're like, perfect. And Hawthorne doesn't really over-the-top play it. He plays it just perfectly. And then, of course, we got Glenn Shaddix in there as his associate Bob. Glenn, you might remember as being in films such as Beetlejuice. And, of course, he was also in an episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but he's good in here as Bob. Now, as you could probably guess from this type of film, it is going to end with a fight between Spartans and Phoenix. It's just the twists and turns that go from the film, with Phoenix trying to kill the one person Cocteau wants him to, Spartan stopping it, Spartan being his fish out of water reactions to everything, and then there's one shot where he even has his hand like this. That kind of sums up how if you were to take someone from like even modern era, let alone the type of future that Spartan's from, and put him in this situation, that would be there. I think a certain TikTok song would probably fit it. The fuck! The fuck! He'd just be screaming that, just at everything. But then you'd be owing so much money by the end of the day just from the one credit thing. Which, another thing I love about that is that even when it's not the main joke of a scene, just the fact that the sound department even includes it in like the background audio and scenes, like the aforementioned museum scene when Phoenix is like cursing a couple times, you just hear it in the background. It just made me chuckle. I forgot about that, even though there's a couple other moments where they forget to do it. But a scene like that, and just everyone all acting like, come, museum patron, we must go this way. Everyone talking in certain regards. Now, with how it looks, how the movie ends, it looks like things are going to slowly go back to normal, but it's like you got to find a happy median between what this future is and what the character played by Dennis Leary is like suggesting. Which Dennis Leary, his whole rant thing when he meets Spartan, which his character Edward Friendly goes, he like, you know, he wants a high cholesterol, he believes in freedom of speech and all that. That's a pretty good scene. I don't have it all memorized or written down, but that one right there kind of shows why a future like this, you know, other than just watching it, probably is not good if it ever were to happen, because then you're just going to be suppressing all the stuff that makes life worth living to the point where it's like, why bother? And of course, now it's time for the trivia. Now, I went through the IMDb section and I picked out the most interesting bits and pieces to me. And then there's also one I didn't put in the notes, but I still have the IMDb page up, so I'll be going through that. Now, Glenn plays Bob pretty much like how everybody else in there's played, just a little bit more foppish. And it works for how the character is, especially when he starts being an ass kiss to everybody. And then the joke at the end with Larry's character. But apparently in the novelization, it's revealed that he's a eunuch, and that Cocteau did this to prevent him from becoming too ambitious. It's like, you just add a little bit of scumballism to him. And here's something I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, but here's a perfect time to do it. Fred Dekker did some uncredited rewrites on the script. Now, when he was brought on, the script began in the future, and Spartan wasn't introduced until he was brought out of suspended animation. Now, just looking at how the film is in its final form, if you were to do that, it wouldn't work as well. And I have to agree with Dekker's logic for why adding to it, and it actually does fit there. Because if we're just seeing the future, and that's all we see, other than just seeing how crazy it is like, other than them trying to maybe suggest that Spartan comes from a past that's exactly like ours, note for note, within just the film world, it doesn't really seem that jarring. It just seems weird, and then a modern person brought in there. Now, this is his reason for it, and I have to agree with it. Per Dekker, if you don't show Kansas, Oz isn't that special. That is true. Oz isn't as special if you don't see Kansas. If you don't go from a sepia tone into the Technicolor, you don't really have a big shift. So having the pre-credits part be all in 96 and then shifting into the future after Spartan is put on ice, you definitely get a compare and contrast, and it also adds a little bit to the satire and humor from Stallone's reactions. Now, Snipes' kicks and punches look lurchy and awkward at times, which adds a little bit to the humor and a little bit to the cartoonish nature. Now, we know he's a black belt in real life, and I guess they were so fast they blurred on camera, so he was asked to slow him down. Not the first time that that's happened, it wouldn't be the last. We know Jet Li had to do the same thing with Lethal Weapon 4. If memory serves me right, that's the movie he had to do that for. And speaking of Snipes, apparently he hated his blonde dye job. And one thing I noticed at times, you can definitely tell that his natural hair color is starting to show through it. It's like a couple shots. And once filming was done, he shaved his head. But of course, after this is when Dennis Rodman began dyeing his hair different colors, and he said that look was inspired by Simon Phoenix. And if memory serves me right, didn't he still have that hair job when he started getting involved in WCW storylines? Here's what Stallone had to say about filming the cryogenic freezing scene. It was probably the worst 5 hours I've ever had on a movie set. I was terrified. And apparently the makers of this film got sued by a Hungarian science fiction writer. And I am likely going to butcher this name, so if there's anyone from Hungary or anyone that speaks Hungarian listening, please forgive me. Istvan Nemer. He said that most of Demolition Man was based on his novel Holtak Harka, which when you translate it means Flight of the Dead, which he published in 1986. In the novel, a terrorist and a counterterrorism soldier are cryogenically frozen, then awakened in the 22nd century to find violence has been purged from society. Nemer claimed that a committee proved that 75% of this movie is identical to the book. He chose not to sue because it would have been too expensive for him to hire a lawyer and fight against major Hollywood forces in the United States. He also claimed that Hollywood plagiarized works of many Eastern European writers after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and that he knows the person allegedly responsible for illegally selling his idea to the filmmakers. Now, there's a couple parts to that I want to address. Even if this so-called committee he mentioned could prove that 75% of it did that, that doesn't mean that they knowingly plagiarized it. I mean, he could probably make a lawsuit of it. But I'm usually of the opinion that just because two writers did the same idea doesn't mean A plagiarized B or vice versa. Sometimes two people can come up with the same idea independently and there just be differences in the plot. Now, I know that after this, a certain writer would sue a certain Hollywood director over a certain film with McGregor and Johansson in it. But that one, I don't know if we ever found out if he actually had seen the other one and consciously decided to base it on that. But there was enough stuff that was comparable between them that you could see how. As for the other works of European writers that were plagiarized after the wall came down, what works is he talking about? The IMDb never elaborates, so I'm guessing he never elaborates. I would love to hear what these other works are and to see what they are. Probably some other big budget movies. But the thing is, if he had such a claim, he should have just filed anyway and then seen what the court said, whether they sided with him or not. But since he didn't, we'll never know. And now we come to the last one. This is going to be the lengthy one. This is why I did not copy and paste it. But apparently the final cut we have of this film was not the initial one, which, big surprise. No, that's not what I mean by that. Apparently, Warner Brothers disliked the original cut, which was over 2 hours long, and there was other behind-the-scenes problems, and they hired an editor to do some re-editing, which also happened on Tango and Cash, another Stallone movie. Now, because of this, a couple subplots were simplified and dropped, and some scenes got left on the cutting room floor. Now, one of them, there's only a little bit of it left in there, and it becomes just mainly like a thing for Spartan to lament on without there being a payoff on it, which even without the payoff, it works within the context of the film where he mentions his daughter, because we already found out his wife is dead. But he mentions his daughter, and, Huxley does offer to go look for her. But he's like, no. Which you can already tell from that. He's content with just knowing she's alive, but not wanting to go into her. Now, originally there was going to be a little subplot to follow up on that, where when they're down in the sewers looking for Friendly, Stallone finds his grown-up daughter. And in a fight scene, the person down there he's protecting was going to be her. That would have been an interesting moment, but they cut it out. I don't know if it was something about the scene wasn't working or if they cut it for pacing. Based on the final film, I'd probably say pacing. Some other violent scenes were cut down, like actually seeing Phoenix remove an eye, which would have been interesting to see, but it doesn't hurt not to see it. Sometimes theater of the mind's a little bit more interesting. There's a scene near the end where he kills several people inside the cryo prison. And then also where he kills a guy when he's escaping. So basically, instead of just the police actually seeing that he took it, we actually see it. Which that's another one that's like, maybe it works a little bit more, especially with how the scene is finally edited to actually just have it implied and then see the aftermath and be like, ooh, theater of the mind, because until we finally actually see how much of a danger he is in a lethal situation. And then there was also another bit during the final fight where Spartan used a wire on Phoenix. And then, of course, the character of Zachary Lamb was going to die in this one, which I kind of wondered while watching this one. He kind of seems to vanish in the latter half of the film, which in a couple scenes makes sense, but it's like, And then Spartan and Huxley find him, and they talk to him before he dies. Yeah. And then there's some other lines of dialogue that were cut, some of which are in the trailer. And then there was also some longer action scenes. And then, of course, both the sewer battle and the final showdown were heavily cut. And apparently, some caused a continuity mistake because I guess there are 6 different cryocons working with Simon, but only 2 are being shown killed. And, of course, one of these is played by Jesse Ventura, which he's very prominent in shots. before the sewer fight. And apparently there was going to be a fight between him and Stallone that got cut, which I think would have been interesting because at this point with this film, Jesse worked with the two big action stars of the 80s, Stallone and Arnold. You know, had scenes with them. I mean, in Predator, him and Arnold are basically on the same team, shooting people. I mean, he gets the famous one-liner, "Ain't got time to bleed." But here, he's basically just a background heavy. No big fight scene. It's one of those things like, you really cut out a fight scene involving Jesse Ventura and Sylvester Stallone? I really do hope they said they cut it for pacing, not because something wasn't working, because a scene like that seems criminal to cut. And there's some other ones in here. I'm just not going to read the rest of it because that one alone just makes me mad reading it. It's one of those ones that you should probably stick those prisoners inside the cold zone. Which, of course, another scene that Ventura shared with Arnold, you know, in Batman and Robin. At least there he got some dialogue with the action hero. And no, that's really all there is to say about this film. It is a fun action sci-fi film. Definitely still holds up. I mean, I went on nauseam about the satire. The special effects still hold up. The score holds up. The performances from our leads are pretty good. Stallone. I mean, it's basically like what you expect from Stallone in an action film, but there is some humanity in there, like when he's talking about his family, his daughter, his reactions to what he's seeing. You definitely buy him and Huxley as a couple. I mean, you definitely tell his attraction at one point, but you could tell he's also a little stifled by the fact, like, oh, really? This is the type of world I'm in. Huxley, you could tell she is attracted to Spartan from the beginning. Not sure how to act on it because they're both from different worlds as it is, but by the end you could tell, ooh, this is going to be an interesting relationship. Bringing up my notes. Glenn, I've already talked about. Bob, you know, what'd you expect from him in this role? Dennis Leary, good for what he has to do. Nigel Hawthorne, you definitely want to see him smacked in the face, and when he gets his comeuppance from one of the goons. And Snipes, he is beautifully evil and slightly theatrical as Phoenix. Just the right amount of a cintura for the tone this film is going for. And then him and Stallone, they have the nice villain-hero chemistry. You know the phrase, your hero is only as good as his villain? This is a good example of that because they match each other perfectly. I mean, their comments, the way they roll their dialogue together, their fight scenes. I mean, especially in the latter half of the film, even though he's not built as big as Stallone, even 90s Stallone, with how it's filmed and how Snipes does his kicks and his punches, you definitely believe that he's a physical match for him. And that's really all I have to say about this film. As you can tell how I've gushed on it, it gets the Mars stamp of approval, and it definitely comes with my recommendation, especially if you're a fan of 90s Stallone. You definitely should watch it.